In my mind, like the world that existed in February of 2020 doesn't exist anymore. It just doesn't. And so I think for leaders and or HR teams that are trying to push back to that reality and just do a big reset, they can do that. And some companies absolutely will do that, but they're going to have a really hard time holding on to talent. I think when you look at some of the global statistics right now, upwards of 40% of employees are planning to look for a job this year. That coupled with the fact that there are so many more organizations now who've already made commitments to being hybrid or remote, and many new companies that are being created now are being created by default that way. Those employees have options. So if you're trying to cram them back into a construct that no longer fits the world and certainly their world, they're going to make a choice with their feet and decide whether they want to stick around for that or go somewhere else.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of All About HR. I'm Nelly, and in today's episode, I talk with Lars Schmidt. Lars is the founder of the Redefining HR Accelerator. He's a best-selling author, and he's a podcast host himself of the Redefining HR podcast. We talked about the next generation of chief people officers, what skills are important for them. And in that regard, we talked about T-shaped. And we also looked at the powerful combination of community and shared learning. Why does that work so well? More than enough reason, I think, to check out this episode straight away. As always though, you know it by now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and like this episode. Thank you so much, and enjoy the episode. Welcome to another episode of All About HR. Hi and welcome everyone to a brand new episode of All About HR. I'm so happy that you all join us today again. My name is Nelly, I'm your host, and today I will be talking to Lars Schmidt, who is here with me. Hi Lars.
Hey Nelly, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. What about yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Good to be here. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too, absolutely. Now, Lars, for those of you who don't know him yet, is the founder of the Redefining HR Accelerator and also the founder of Amplify. Now, Lars did many other things. He also wrote a bestseller called Redefining HR, and he himself is a podcast host. And now I think, Lars, that I'm surely forgetting a bunch of other things that you're doing, so I'm not sure if there's anything that you'd like to add.
Yeah, I mean, that works. I'm a dad, I'm a husband. I do some writing for Fast Company as well, but really kind of at everything. I'm an advocate for modern HR and try to get involved in projects that help advance the field forward. Now,
Lars, there's one question. No, there are actually several questions, but there's one definitely burning question that I had for you. And that is, what is it that you have with the color pink? Because I see pink a lot in the Redefining HR Accelerator communication. It's in your really fabulous studio that I already told you before the show that I'm a bit jealous of. It's also, I think, in one of the surfboards behind you. Sometimes you wear a pink t-shirt. So what is it with the color pink?
I like the color pink first and foremost. But B, I'm a big brand nerd. I always have been. And so I like the idea of having a visual identity associated with the platform for Redefining HR, just so that it's consistent, so that if you're seeing whether it's a blog post, something about the accelerator, the community, podcast, video, whatever it might be, there's a consistency to the look and feel. And so with pink kind of being the anchor color for Redefining HR, I want to be able to reinforce that through all those different channels.
And I think it works. Something else, Lars, I saw, you mentioned something that I thought, okay, I need to ask him about this. You said the future of work is not absolute. The future of work is choice. And there was this cool image, I think, of Bart Simpson that went with these words. Now, yeah, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're in an interesting time for HR. I don't need to tell your viewers and listeners that, they're part of your network and your community, so they know what's happening around us. I think that one of the biggest shifts for us right now is that, the history of HR, if you go back to our legacy, it's often oriented around, playbooks and set ways of doing things, right? This is how we do compensation. This is how we do recruiting. This is how we do benefits. And the constructs of being an employee is also pretty structured, right? You come into an office, you work 9 to 5, you work Monday through Friday. And after going through what we went through last year with the pandemic and everything that came from that, those norms are kind of blown up. And so it's not about, creating any, it is absolutely remote or it is absolutely hybrid, or it is absolutely co-located. Companies are going to be all over that spectrum. But the reality is, I think the ones that do really well are the ones that create flexible constructs that allow employees to opt into what works for them. And that's what I mean by choice, giving employees, the power for the employees to be able to say, like, some are desperate to go back to an office. Some are like, I want to be there 5 days a week the moment it's safe and I have the green light to do so. Others will never go back to an office. And most are somewhere in between. And we're talking about, knowledge workers or people in roles that have the ability to work remotely. And obviously that's not all employees. So let me qualify that. But I think for those employees, choice wins, flexibility wins. And I think companies and HR teams specifically that master that are going to have a huge advantage.
Choice is then the word for 2021 and beyond teams.
And the phrase is probably hold on tight, because 2020 was brutal for HR for many reasons. 2021 is going to be exhilarating for many other reasons. So
yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lars. Now, slightly changing tack here, because I wanted to talk with you, of course, about redefining HR. Redefining HR, when you hear that, it can mean many different things. But to you, what does redefining HR mean?
Yeah, to me, redefining HR is kind of taking control of the narrative of what it means to practice HR. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes HR is stereotyped in a certain way based on kind of legacy perceptions of the function. So, transactional, reactive, administrative, things that aren't flattering and things, frankly, that I certainly don't identify with. And everybody who, I interviewed in my book and I have in my podcast and people who are leading modern teams, they don't identify with. And so the idea of, a lot of people think, do you mean like now we're people operations, or now we're talent and culture? Maybe. I'm not saying you have to kill the name HR. Obviously, my book is called Redefining HR. It's more about your mindset and your impact and kind of creating a new narrative for the field. And so that's, it's the reputation, it's the impact, it's how it's valued by the business. But it's really kind of, not allowing ourselves to be painted with that legacy brush that doesn't apply to a lot of us, and kind of, retaking control of the narrative of who we are and what we do.
And what do you feel has triggered this need to redefine HR? I know you just mentioned the fact that a lot of people working in the field, they can't identify with the way HR has been, let's say, pictured. So that's probably one of the things. But what other developments have triggered this need for a new HR, for redefining HR?
I think if you look at, and I use this kind of, analogy of HR as a spectrum. And this is anecdotal. This is based on my, interviews and experience and yada, yada. So, I don't have the data to show this if you ask me that. But I'd say probably if you look at the field, there's 10% on that very cutting edge, right? And they're fully integrated in the business, key partners to the executive team, strategic advisors. They're really full-on business operators who focus on people. You have the other end of that spectrum, that's probably 20%, and that's more of that transactional, reactive personnel. That's not always their fault. That may just be the environment they're in and the leadership they have, and they're just not empowered to do anything beyond, get people paid and make sure they have benefits and that sort of thing. And the bulk are in the middle. And so I think, the imperative now for redefining HR, certainly coming out of the events of 2020, is we have this real opportunity to fundamentally change how we operate as a function, but also what the very nature of work looks like. Much of, I mentioned the kind of Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, being in an office. Those are industrial era constructs that have held over for decades, generations. And we've just gone through this global phenomenon that kind of poked a hole in that perceived reality of how work needed to happen. And so we're, now that we're kind of charting our path forward, there's so much opportunity for us. And so I think now is really the time where, the idea of redefining HR and kind of taking control of that narrative and building something different from the ground up based on today's reality is so important for the field.
Where do you see the biggest shifts already happening now? You touched on, of course, the choice element earlier, choice for employees, for instance, when it comes to coming to the office or staying at home, when we talk about knowledge workers. But where do you see other big shifts happening? Yeah,
there's a couple things. I think the, obviously the shift to remote and hybrid is massive. Most companies who had the ability to have employees work from home are now hybrid by default. To what extent, that can vary tremendously, but I think that, hybrid is going to be here to stay. And it's also the most difficult construct if you compare that to fully distributed or fully co-located in an office. I think our conversation around racial equity and justice and social justice has changed. I shouldn't say has changed because it's not an end state, is changing. And the imperative on HR to really build representative and inclusive organizations and work systems and kind of identify and uproot systemic inequity within their operations and their business and their company. That's another huge imperative for the field of HR. I think our conversations around mental health and wellness and well-being are at a very different place today than they were even 5 years ago. So that's another big shift. And then another would be business acumen. I think what's exciting about the field is, historically HR had been a pretty insular field, meaning, you came in as an associate and you worked your way up, but a lot of people spent their entire careers in the field of HR. Now we've got lots of people coming into the field from other areas of the business, bringing in new perspectives, new skill sets, new ways of thinking, new ways of solving problems. And so that infusion of new ideas and talent is also having a transformative kind of accelerating impact on our field. And then the last thing I would say is the shift from black box to open source in terms of how we think and how we operate. Historically, HR wasn't very good at sharing and kind of talking about like how they did what they did, right? Like, we'd go on stage and we'd say, look at this cool thing we did. But we wouldn't talk about all the mistakes we made along the way. We wouldn't, give away templates that we were using. Now I think with the way that the ethos and the mentality of open source has scaled globally, people are much more willing to share their practices, share their templates, share their toolkits. And so having access to that propels us all forward. And so, all of those I think are key factors.
Yeah, there are a lot of elements there that I would love to unpack, and I think we'll do that a little bit later on in the conversation, because there are a few things that I recognize and that we here at AIHR also feel are definitely happening now. So we'll come back to that a bit later, Lars. Before we get there, though, I wanted to zoom in on modern HR and people leadership, because you yourself, you are also all about helping to develop the new generation of chief people officers. We at AIHR, we are also into educating HR professionals. So there is definitely, as I said, some parallels there. But when we look at the Redefining HR Accelerator, I wanted to start here with, what do you feel that modern HR and people leadership looks like?
Yeah, so modern HR and people, it I think is anchored in a lot of those points that I mentioned in terms of like the shifts. So, strong business acumen, strong kind of peer networks to help leaders solve problems they haven't seen before, prioritization around racial equity and inclusion and representation in all aspects of the people strategy, comfortable with people analytics. And you don't have to be a data scientist by any means. Few of us are. Few of our organizations even have people at that level, though some do. But you have to at least be, data informed and kind of understand how to extract insights from the data. You also have to be, agile. And I think, when I talk about agile, I use it more in the context of your mindset. So the world around us is, understatement, of course, but like changing dramatically. And it has been. And if we're not prioritizing our own learning, our own kind of education and learning agility to stay on top of some of these external factors that are impacting our business, we're limiting the value that we bring in our roles. And, it's a double-edged sword, because it's also never been more difficult to find the time to invest in that, because the demands of your jobs, for all of you who are practitioners right now, like you've got a really hard job, and the demands, they don't end, and they're increasing, frankly. And so because of that, it makes it really hard to find the time for education, but you've got to find a way to do that and to build that into your workflow, just so that you can keep tabs on all of these different changing dynamics that are definitely going to be having an impact in your world.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that, Lars, because that is something I saw in one of your tweets, I believe. And there you said community and shared learning, that they are crucial to building a lasting career. And then you said, but yet many HR practitioners, they struggle to find the time. And by the way, I think that is true across the board, right? That is not just for HR practitioners. Yeah. That's for everybody working in organizations. We all say that L&D is very important. We all recognize the importance of developing your people within the organization. But then one of the, I think, most common issues that everybody has to deal with is people struggle to find that time. What do you think could help tackle that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do. Look, I think at a bare minimum, and this is certainly what I do myself, and I advocate anybody that will listen to do the same. At a bare minimum, carve out 1 hour in your schedule every single week, same time, same hour. Block it. Do not let people schedule over it. This is your learning time. This is your time to actually go through and read all those articles that you've seen on social media or that your colleagues or friends emailed you and said, hey, check this out. It's your time to listen to that podcast, that you liked between two leaders you admire and you want to hear their conversation. It's your time for you to read that white paper, read that book, whatever it might be. If you don't actually put that in your calendar and block it and defend it, it's not going to happen. So at a bare minimum, I think everybody, if you're, watching, listening, do this right now. Go to your calendar, find a time that's available, block an hour, and make it a repeating weekly schedule, but really take that seriously, right? Because people, you're in jobs in HR and people are putting things on your calendar all the time. You're always having to juggle to accommodate other people. This is your you time. This is your investment in you. So block that time. That is not, a loose thing that you'd like to get to. It's an absolute must that you will get to every week. I think start there. And then from there, I think you can find ways to scale that, maybe make it 2 hours a week, because you have to realize that when you think about education, it's an investment in yourself, right? And especially for those of you in corporate roles, you're not going to be in that job the rest of your life for most of you. And so, yes, you have commitments to your employer and you should meet those commitments and those obligations, but you can't sacrifice your own growth and development completely just to be able to serve your employer. You've got to be able to find that balance. And that's not always easy for HR to do because of the demands of our job, but it's important. And so, I would hope that all of you do that, defend that, take it very seriously, but think of it as an investment in yourself. And you've got to be making a continual investment in yourself in order to really build a lasting career, given the complexity of the world that we're in right now.
It is so true, but at the same time, Lars, it's also so true that it's so easy to just skip that 1 hour. Here within our team at AHR, at some point we also said, okay, let's all set apart 1 hour a week to learn, like you say, to invest in yourself, to work on your development. And obviously I started that, was very optimistic, and for the first maybe 5-6 weeks, it went very well. And then, slowly but surely, that 1 hour now, I don't know where it went, but it's gone.
Yeah, look, you're a great case study. It's easy to say, it's not easy to do. That's why I'm reinforcing, you've really got to be committed to this and view it as this isn't just now I'm going to learn something today. This is I'm going to invest in myself. I'm worth investing in myself. And that, I think when you reframe that narrative a little bit, so that it's not just I want to learn because learning is important. You're saying, I want to invest in myself because an investment in myself will pay dividends down the road, today and tomorrow and in the future. I think maybe reframing that a little bit might help, make that commitment a bit more firm. But it's not easy. So I don't want to present that it is.
No, but I agree with you. And maybe that's another thing that we should redefine then, Lars, right? That we shouldn't maybe talk about it as development or learning. Maybe we should talk about it as investing in yourself and then, to have the dividends down the road. I think this goes for a lot of things that we talk about. It's so easy to say we should do this, we should do that. But in practice, it always is so much harder than when we can philosophize a little bit about it. And for instance, a conversation that we have today. And I think that also goes for modern people leadership. Now, one of the things that I was wondering about here is that many organizations, that's what we're seeing now as well, they aren't there yet. We see examples, and I saw you talk about them as well on your social channels, of companies who can't wait to push their people back into the offices. How optimistic are you actually that this awareness of modern people leadership, redefining HR, that will actually become mainstream?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm an eternal optimist, so that applies to this as well. But I think, but I'm also a realist. We have to own that, the kind of HR that we're talking about, that modern, progressive, the kind of case studies that I highlight in the book, that's the minority of the field. That's not the majority, right? So let's own that and be honest about that. I think that when you look at organizations that are trying to push back to those, in my mind, the world that existed in February of 2020 doesn't exist anymore. It just doesn't. And so I think for leaders and or HR teams that are trying to push back to that reality and just do a big reset. We're just going to go in the Wayback Machine and we're going to hit that date and we're going to they can do that. And some companies absolutely will do that, but they're going to have a really hard time holding on to talent. I think when you look at some of the global statistics right now, upwards of 40% of employees are planning to look for a job this year. They call it the great, tsunami of turnover and the great exodus. I think that, that coupled with the fact that there are so many more organizations now who've already made commitments to being hybrid or remote, and many new companies that are being created now are being created by default that way, those employees have options. So if you're trying to cram them back into a construct that no longer fits the world and certainly their world, they're going to make a choice with their feet and decide whether they want to stick around for that. Or go somewhere else. Or maybe they're going to stick around and be miserable because now they're commuting, 3 hours a day again, and they haven't done that for 15 months. Now you either have people leaving or you have people staying and being actively disengaged. Both of those outcomes are pretty bad. So I think what I expect to see, this shift that is happening right now with people designing return to workplace plans and making commitments to hybrid and figuring that out, the next year is going to be like this. It's going to be all over the place. And I think we're not really going to start to stabilize until probably mid 2022, when companies have tried some of these models and they've failed and they try different things, or companies, push to return to that pre-pandemic norm and their employees, said, nope, that doesn't work for us. And they left. I think that some of those organizations that are trying to revert back to that legacy process, they're probably going to have to feel some pain before they make changes. Because in their mind right now, until they felt that pain, sure, I read all these articles that talk about the Great Resignation and all these things, but my people like it here. My people want to go back in office. I'm the CEO. I want to go back in office, and if I do, I'm sure my employees do. So I'm going to make everybody do that. That those companies and those leaders are going to have to feel some pain of the outcome of that, and maybe they won't in some cases. But I think that for them to I think pain will have to be the thing that gets them to realize, okay, wait a minute, maybe this doesn't work anymore. Maybe I have to rethink this. But, all the articles or podcasts or research in the world today might not get them there. They might have to get to that pain point before they rethink things.
This partially already answers one of my next questions, actually, Lars, because I was going to ask you what, in your opinion, could happen or needs to happen to accelerate this process. So we have a little bit of pain, perhaps, that some organizations might need to feel first. But are there any other things that come to mind?
Yeah, I think the pain for the companies that try to push people back into a construct that doesn't work, I think that will be a reality. I think for those of you that are watching and listening that are working in organizations that are having that pressure, look for examples of what your competitors are doing, either direct kind of vertical business competitors or talent competitors. So companies you're typically trying to pull talent from, and if they're, hybrid or flexible or whatever, if they have constructs that they've created and committed to, that are more progressive and flexible, get that data and bring that to your boss, bring that to the CEO and be like, hey, look, you're the CEO, you can make this call. Hopefully you also have survey data from your employees. If not, you absolutely should have that in terms of what is their ideal scenario? What do they want to be hybrid? Do they want to be fully remote? If they were hybrid, how many days a week? I think absolutely all of you should be having that data, because that data should certainly shape what it is you propose in terms of your structure. But if you have a CEO who's looking at that data and the data is saying, we want a hybrid construct or whatever, and you're saying, yeah, but I want you in an office, so I'm going to make you go in an office. You have the data to show them that's a mistake. You're telling them based on all the other research that's out there right now that you can easily get your hands on that that's a mistake. But the reality is, some CEOs are just going to be very stubborn about what they expect. And, no amount of data is going to change their mind. That's why I say, in those scenarios, pain is the only thing that might.
Yeah. I'm afraid that's true too. Now, Lars, you already mentioned a few of the competencies that you believe are very important for the new generation of chief people officers. I heard you talk about data literacy. You also talked about business acumen, among other things. And at AIHR, we also believe that the future of HR is T-shaped. So we have this competency framework, and there are 5 main competencies. There's business acumen, surprisingly, there's data literacy, there's people advocacy, there is digital integration, and then in the vertical part of that T is the functional capabilities or the functional competencies. Now, I wanted to ask you what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think all those things are right. What I might add to that would be, I hate the term branding as it relates to an individual, but I think executive branding and presence and the ability to influence up and down the organization is a vital component to modern chief people officers, and often something that they get zero training in. And for some people who are lucky, like they have innate abilities in that area, and they're able to do that. For many, they don't, and they need that to be successful. If you're influencing the board, if you're like we're talking about designing and kind of pushing back perhaps against the CEO who's trying to go in the wrong direction, if you don't have that ability to influence and to communicate and to make a compelling argument and back it up and stand by it firmly, it's going to be really hard to move that. And I think, again, going back from like the modern profile to the legacy profile, because the legacy profile, the stereotype is it's more administrative and reactive, like they don't have influence. They're not able to influence that shift. And so that piece is there. And I would even say, and this kind of connects to that a little bit, is writing and communication. Written communication. I think so much of our, whether it's, emails, blog posts, company memos, et cetera, most of us in HR have never been trained in writing, in actually kind of, articulating our thoughts and ideas in a concise way with written language. And so I think that's another piece that is really important. But I do agree that T-shape is important. You have to have a deep enough understanding in a lot of those areas, and you're probably only going to go deep in a couple of them. So super interesting additions there, though, Lars. And I think you are absolutely right that the let's say the influence element, very important, and the writing also very important. And I think the two are, well, everything is linked, of course, but these two particularly are, because I think when you want to make your point as a CHRO or a chief people officer, one, yes, you need to know how to verbally make your point and come across, but that's something that you, I think, 9 out of 10 times will probably need to support by a written material as well. So I think these two make a lot of sense. So what I wanted to ask you about as well, Lars, is you have this combination also in the Redefining HR Accelerator of community and shared learning. What makes this such a powerful combination, in your opinion? Yeah, I mean, to me, like my personal kind of approach and view is, community over everything. I think community is so core to advancing the field of HR, and particularly as it relates to CPOs and existing CPOs, CHROs, heads of people, and people that are moving into that space. Your community is your lifeline in a lot of cases. Like, it is such a hard job. It is an incredibly difficult job. It's an emotional job. It's a stressful job. You're dealing with the highest and highs and lowest of lows of employees, and you need that support network. You cannot be a high impact CPO if you don't have a peer network. You just can't. Because there's so many things that you can't share with anybody in your organization. And if you don't have external people to share that with, to ask questions, to lean on when you need it, it's already a lonely job, and it's infinitely more lonely if you don't have those peer networks to support you. And so what's interesting to me about like the cohort programs within the accelerator is, you're learning alongside a global mix of peers. And, for the upcoming cohort that launches in July, there's students from 8 countries represented. And so in particular, I think as important as it is, and this is kind of similar to my comments around education, as important it is to build your network as a CHRO, it's really hard to find the time to do that, right? You don't have a lot of bandwidth to go to conferences back when conferences happened. You might have a local peer network, in your local city. You might have if you're working in tech, most venture capital firms will have, somebody who kind of gets all the heads of people together, and has like a loose organization around that. But, though, if you have those, you're lucky. And a lot of people don't even have those. And so I think what's interesting and actually very intentional around designing the accelerator program is I wanted to create a platform to bring global people leaders together to share ideas, to build kinship and community. The way that the organization, the cohorts are structured, It's a mix of asynchronous and synchronous learning. So for the synchronous session, one of them is a learning session where I bring in guest instructors who are, world-class experts in different disciplines to train them on a topic. And then the other is a discussion session where they're all broken into breakout groups, and the breakout groups are to discuss that topic, but also to share challenges that they're facing in their current role related to that topic, so that everybody can say, oh, you know what? I've faced that before, and here's what I did when that happened. Or maybe you can try this. Or actually, you know what? I designed this a year ago. I have all these templates. I'll send them to you and you can use them. So the ability for that peer-to-peer, no pun intended, but acceleration of both learning and network equity is essential. So I think that's going to be, everything that I build within the accelerator as it continues to scale will have a default lean on community, because I think that's just so important in today's world, especially for the next generation of CPOs.
All right, Lars, I think we are now getting to the very last part of our conversation. And there's something that we like to do with all our guests is we like to ask them to share an epic fail and or an epic win with us.
Yeah, I mean, look, I love, failure. There's lots of good learning in failure. I think a recent epic fail for me was, last year during the pandemic, I host a podcast called Redefining HR. I thought that, with everybody at home, quarantining for the most part, I would experiment with, instead of doing an audio podcast, I would make it a daily live video show. And I would, I thought, hey, perfect environment to experiment with something like that. It was a disaster. Like, nobody watched, nobody caved. There was no engagement. I did it for about 3 weeks. And then just, realized it was, just didn't get any traction. So I had to kill it and go back to the typical format. So that was a humbling experience. I thought something that I thought would land didn't land at all. And that, I think for me, I'm the opposite of risk averse. Like, I'm happy to try things and pilot. And if they work, do more of them. And if they don't, move on from it. And so that was a good lesson for me of just, live streaming video and in the context of the early days of a global pandemic. I think, a win for me was, probably back when I was at, Ticketmaster, one that stands out, when I was being groomed to succeed our CHRO. And in that, they asked me to create an internal comms function at Ticketmaster from the ground up. And I did that for about a month before we announced our intent to merge with Live Nation. And, they didn't have anybody who did internal comms there. And they looked at our org chart. They're like, oh, wait, you have this Lars guy who does internal comms. And like, I had been the global head of talent acquisition. Like, I'd been a recruiter all up until the last month when I started branching out a bit. And so I was tasked with the internal comms strategy for a multi-billion-dollar global merger, and pulled it off. And, we didn't end up bringing any consultants. I designed the whole plan myself. And interestingly enough, this was probably foundational for me in open source because and network equity, because I was like, I've never done this, but I was a member of a networking group called the Entertainment Human Resources Network in LA. And so I knew people from like Warner Brothers and Disney and other organizations who'd been through mergers. And I called my friend there and I'm like, hey, could you put me through to your head of internal comms so I can ask them, like, what do I do? Like, what do I look out for? And people were super generous with their time. They met me for coffee. They shared, their approaches. Some shared templates. And so, yeah, I think that was at a pivotal point in my career, being tasked with something that seemed impossible, leveraging both network equity and community and open source allowed me to successfully solve that problem. And I think that kind of sent me on this different direction in terms of advocacy for all those things, because I saw the benefit firsthand.
Yes, when I was listening to you, I was thinking, wow, I can see how the dots are connecting here, and how somehow that was the seed for what you are doing today, and the community coming back. And nice stories, both of them actually. Thank you for sharing, and also well done for keeping up the live streaming for 3 weeks for every day, because that is still a nice effort, I think.
Yeah, I mean, really, it came down to like, most of the guests were friends in the space or contacts. So it was like me being able to hang out with somebody for an hour. But nobody watched, but I had fun catching up.
Yeah, but still a nice effort. Thank you so much. And thank you so much as well for this conversation, Lars. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. That was it. So thanks everyone for listening to this episode as well. Don't forget, as always, to subscribe to the channel, leave a review or a comment, and share it with a friend. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
All right. Thanks everyone. Thanks, Neely.